Hello and welcome everyone to our second session of Decolonize in Economics 2024. Just before our second session starts, I have a couple of little reminders for folks who are maybe just joining us for the second session and haven't had a chance to hear some of our overview of some of the logistical pieces of the conference. We have a couple of things that you will see on your Zoom links for day one that offer you a little bit more space for interacting with the summit. So using the Padlet, which will be dropping in the chat, is a place for you to be sharing some of the emerging thoughts or questions that are coming up for you during day one. And we'll have a different one for each day. So we can kind of be communicating with each other in that space and having something that can be a little bit more durable for us to be capturing some of those thoughts and ideas. Of course, feel free to use the chat. We love to see your reactions and how people are participating in this space. So use the chat, share your reactions, and also remember that you can save that chat after the session. I will just want to say thank you to everyone who is joining us for this really important conference. I know that so many of us are coming in from very different spaces as they're joining each session, and we're all rumbling with a lot of the different things that are coming up as we engage the conversation of decolonize in economics. And so you're all, your participation here is instrumental to making this summit possible and goes into supporting the presenters, the panelists, and the sessions through your involvement. So thank you all so much for being here. And so now I want to pass it over to Jonathon Freeman of Native Roots Network, who will be introducing and sharing with y'all our session for this conference, session 2, what is decolonization? So thank you all so much for being here, and thank you, Jonathon.
Yeah, thank you, Nicola, for the introduction, and thank you everybody who's put so much work into pulling this together. Another year, another summit, and the world is just continuing to need this more and more. And I just really want to recognize where everybody's coming into this space with so much. There's just so much going on. Even there in Humboldt, our thoughts are with the students and the community. Our thoughts are with the students all over who are actually taking the lead and taking a stand. Just really appreciate that and want to acknowledge what we're all feeling and what we're all dealing with in this time. Yeah, it's a lot. So just really holding space for that. I could just hear the energy in the morning, the first conversation too. There's just a lot of emotion, and there's a lot of energy that's, I think, appropriately being generated in this moment of healing and confrontation and direct action. We really want to welcome everybody to this session. We're back again. This is a redux, I guess you could say, in a way. And for me, thinking about why we would come back and have this framing conversation with myself, with Kamuela, with PennElys, as a way, I think that we're speaking about decolonizing economics, decolonizing with an ing. So this is work, right? This is a path that we're working and we're walking. This is something that we're creating as we walk. And so continuing the conversation, I think, has a lot of meaning in this time. And also, I think about the conversation around decolonization, not necessarily just an indigenous people thing, right? It is a thing that we all need, right? This is a thing when we start to define what colonization is, when we talk about coloniality, these types of mechanisms and logics are what's leading to the destruction of our planet. And so, yes, indigenous people can and are willing and are already doing work to show us another way, right? To show the society another way. Part of the thing with bringing PennElys and Kabu back is to share where they are in their thinking around this topic a year later. Some of it's going to be the same, some of it's going to be slightly different. We also want to look at, actually, I want to pause just for a second and say, we didn't do I'm not going to do a big giant bio thing, really want you to look up these speakers, check out their, the presentations that they've done or pieces that they've written and been part of, do that work. We want to spend this time in real time to have conversation. Both amazing people. I've known them both 20 years. and they've done amazing things in that 20 years, and they were doing cool things before then. So I'm think about how grateful I am that I'm here with this space. Um, I think part of this idea here too is that we want to demonstrate the different ways that we look at economies, the different ways that we express the work that we are undertaking to position and advance the reclamation and the deployment of indigenous values, frameworks, and actions. And then also we want to show how these indigenous perspectives and actions may inform the rest, whatever you want to call it, regenerative economy, solidarity economy, well-being economy, all of these different ways that we're looking and talking about shifting economies into a different space. So while you're coming into this space, one of the things that I think that is a universal is that we have an appreciation for Mother Earth in all the different manifestations. So if you want to use the chat today, we're going to be using the chat quite a bit. We'd like to invite you to introduce yourself. And again, just like we did last year, to really what's one aspect of the Mother Earth where you live, an aspect, an element, a feature that you really love, in a way to kind of as we're doing all these digital spaces, to also share a little bit about that grounding outside your window. What is something that you really love about your space? I'm Jonathon Freeman, Native Roots Network. And one of the things that we wanted to do today too, as we open this space, as we think about these ideas of coloniality or decolonization, we want to again recreate a space here so that we can have that a conversation. And would love to invite PennElys, if you would, please help us create that space here so that we can have these meaningful conversations and do this good work.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Jonathon. Thank you, team, for inviting me into this space. And thank you to Kamuela, for being on this panel with us together today. I wanted to, my name is PennElys Droz. I'm Anishinaabe and a nice northern variety European descent. I wanted to share a song with you today that is it's both an invitation in and a celebration of coming together. And I think that when we're talking about what decolonial economies are, what they can mean a celebration and a coming together. So I wanted to offer this song to you today. Way-yo, way-hi-ya, ho-it-oh, way-yo, way-hi-ya, ho-it-oh, way-yo. Minungwa manda matse, way-ya, hey-yo. Nungwa manda gijigak mamwero ying hey ya hey ya hey ya hey how way hey ya oh wait oh hey yo way yo hey ya oh wait oh way yo hey ya oh wait oh way yo minungwa manda matse we hey yo nungwa manda gijigak mamwero yeng hey yo we hey how way hey ho hey ro hey yo hey yo hey ho hey ro hey yo hey ho hey ro hey yo minungwa manda matse we ya hey yo nungwa manda gijigak mamwero ying hey ya hey ya hey ya hey how way hey ya oh wait oh hey oh. Thank you.
you. Thank you so much. And we share that, and we talked about last year too, that there's so many different elements of what we're understanding as making space, and whether that's even looking at the work of Dr. Michael Yellowbird, uh, talking about looking through the lens of neurobiology and decolonizing our minds, that when we sing, that there's so much healing that's taking place on a neurobiological level that now Western science is finally catching up to. I mentioned earlier on that we're talking about this as a path, and I continue to go back to a particular dispatch. If folks ever follow the dispatches from the Zapatistas, excuse me, in 2020 they were ramping up for their mission to go to Europe, and in that there was a series of dispatches, and one's titled "The Mission," and maybe I'll drop it into the chat here in a little bit. But you have Defensa Zapatista, who is this little 8-year-old girl who's a character in the writing, and in a way, she embodies the future of the future feminine of the Zapatista movement. She's kind of smarter than the rest. She's just this brilliant, light beam who's trying to bring her folks together and moving forward. And she's in this dialogue with one of her little friends, Esperanza. And if you don't know Spanish very well, Esperanza translates to hope too, right? So you have this dialogue going, and she's trying to explain to Esperanza about the path and how do we make the path if we don't know where we're going. And there's this little toward the end. There's much in this whole writing. I think Mikhail actually referenced part of it last year, but there's this end where she comes to this part where she says, if we already know where we want to go, that means we also know where we don't want to go. So every step so every step we take moves us towards one path and away from another. We haven't gotten there yet, but the path we walk shows us what our destination will be. If we want to eat tamales, we're not going to plant squash. We live out the storm however we know how, but we are already preparing for what comes next. We prepare it now. That is why we have to take our word far and wide. It doesn't matter if the person who said it isn't originally there or here anymore. Rather, what matters is that the seed reaches fertile ground and grows. Our word must support others. That is our mission, to be a seed that looks for other seeds. And in this interchange between, I think about this conversation today as seeds, searching for fertile ground, and a way that we can grow something. Again, just like this thing, if we want to eat tamales, now's the time to plant corn. One of the things that I also heard this morning, so I was kind of rushing I heard a little bit of the conversation about the mindset, and I brought in the term coloniality. There's decolonization, and decolonization often is referring to the actual, the systemic exploitation of land, resources, and people, and the whole process of invading and taking and owning. But also coloniality is the logic and justification for that exploitation. It's a system of domination. It acts as the foundation for what we have now is for capitalism, nationalism, the logic of modernity. All of those things are wrapped around and in coloniality. It's based in these systems of hierarchy, racial hierarchy, gendered hierarchies. Even you could probably look at the anthro hierarchies, thinking about humans above and beyond and separate from the earth. This has been the logic that's allowed and explained and supported ecocide, genocide, femicide, all of these different things. And so when we think about that today, really invite folks to think, go through their own thinking about where is this conversation today talking about decolonization, and where are we also talking about decoloniality? Where can we, and where are we undercutting the logic, this framework that's holding us hostage, beyond just an occupying force, what remains oftentimes are those systems and are those mindsets. You could say like the naturalization of these ideas. So there's many layers here. Today, what we're going to do too, we're gonna do a couple of short presentations, and after the short presentations, I have a series of questions. And again, really going to be inviting folks to hop into the chat and you know, give your responses, give your answers. And already we're seeing some people you know, putting into the chat here we've invited you to think about a feature of the landscape. You know, if you want to introduce yourself in the chat, a feature of the landscape that you love from where you are, and helping us ground ourselves to Mother Earth. Yeah, so it's a good time. We would like to start this year off. We'd like to actually ask Kamu if you could introduce yourself a little bit, and then like jump in and share, so we can share some of these concepts. We can talk about what we're working on, and then we can get into a dialogue, or I guess in this case, a trialogue.
Sounds good. So we're rolling. All right. Hello, my kako pakahia pau. O Kamuela Joseph no Enos. Sorry, I'm setting my timer up. My name's Kamuela Enos. I was here last year. I'm here again this year. He, him, oya are word for the multiple. I am currently the director of the Office of Indigenous Knowledge and Innovation for the Office of Research for the University of Hawaii System. University of Hawaii is the only R1 university that has Office of Indigenous Knowledge and Innovation embedded at the executive level. So I share that because my positionality is incredibly complex. The work of getting a community organization, like being raised in community organizations and being allowed to move into the Office of Research to help guide how research is done and position funding towards communities of practice has a genealogy. In my presentation today, I will share, I'll share a lot of the same things I shared last year, because I do think repetition, like the things we share cannot just be shared once, and normalization is we make a path by walking it and sharing these things. So my presentation will kind of provide, what I hope to share is to provide the fundamentals of how we, like the words colonialization and colonization, decolonization, they're all English words, and they all come from English and Western epistemology, even though people, indigenous people and peoples of color have wrestled with this concept in English. A lot of our thinking as Hawaiian people comes that we have had our lands and practices intact and unbroken. And how do we bring these practices into the space and as a meeting of epistemologies, and trying to find ways that we're not romanticizing or othering our experience, but bringing these ideas into contemporary space and contemporary structures and formats so that they can be understood and engaged by contemporary society. So that is my the focus of my presentation, and I will jump into it now. So I'm calling this talk developing a practice of indigenizing economics. As you can tell, I kind of wrote it yesterday, the title. I retitled this front slide a lot because I'm having to repurpose it, but that's the general intent. But like any things, I'll start with my genealogy of practice. So this vista is the view of the valley that raised me. This is Waianae Valley and the island of Oahu, which is a Native Hawaiian, predominantly Native Hawaiian community, but comprised of Native Hawaiians who are primarily inter-island diaspora. As we're moved off of our traditional places and lands and practices, we tend to be clustered in communities like Waianae and what were called homesteads. And in this, when you take people out of their context and you put them of like interrelationship with each other and landscape and put them in new contexts where primarily they're being housed without those types of deep ancestral relationships and ties, you create a context of something called poverty. So our community quite often was known by as poverty. But in the 70s, my father and a bunch of his peers occupied land in the back of the valley, and they brought water down to regrow a traditional agrarian crop. Agrarian practices and our ancestral crop, kalo, we call them. So this was a view that raised me, and this is the ultimate teacher to me of everything that I speak to, not just the land, but the ancestors before, who built these highly sophisticated systems of being completely self-sufficient. They are my kumu, my mentors. These are my living mentors. Or that's my father in the middle, Eric, and these are two elders, Uncle Eddie Kaanana and Uncle Walter Paulo, that came to teach traditional fishing to our communities, and that's me as a little kid in the corner from a video capture. So that was the genealogy of practice directly that I come from. And this is my professional genealogy. I'll speak about a lot this organization called Ma'o Farms. In this presentation, it's a community-based social enterprise in the community of Waianae I was raised that send young adults to college by running the daily operations of our organic farm, which soon moved to become the largest organic farm on the heavily urbanized island of Oahu, growing generations of leaders. So that's Uncle William Isla Sr. He was the elder that came out of retirement to allow us to open the farm, to create space for us. That is Kukui Mauna Kea in the middle. She's the co-founder of the farm with her husband, Gary Mauna Kea Kanaka. And she put everything she had into creating this space. And that's on the bottom, Kaui Sana and Derek Parker, two students that I helped to recruit when I first started working there, and they kicked me out of a job because they're able to take the reins of leadership and allowed me to move to the university. And they're probably my biggest mentors I've ever had. So really quickly, the process we're thinking about is a series of steps. I ran through the steps of how we're thinking about like indigenizing economics. So I'll go through that part of the presentation pretty quickly. So the first step in our process that we think about, my genealogy of practice is my father and his peers in the 70s and 80s. Once they reestablished their ancestral practices, they realized that they had to keep the lights on and they couldn't just hold signs forever or publish. When activism is being practiced in a blue collar Native community, you got to create jobs. So they thought deeply about how do we position our ancestral practice as a means of economic development. And I was kind of raised in that generational question among many years, and I thought about it. And when I was at Ma'o, when we kind of were beginning the practice of creating economic development around using ancestral ideologies, we got a lot of pushback, like you're growing kale and chard, you're not growing traditional food. Like, how is this indigenous? And it wasn't really coming a lot from our community. It was coming from external communities wondering what we were doing. And that's when I realized that our ancestry cannot be a museum piece or a romantic identity. It needs to be practically applied. And we need to figure out how we adapt these practices to contemporary spaces. And that's where I came up with this idea of indigenization. Internally, as a team, we were talking. So we mapped out 4 steps, and presentation is about 12 years old. So we've been using it a lot. So this has been something we've practiced. So the first step we thought about is to restate our value. One of the biggest challenges about the word Hawaiian culture is the term Hawaiian culture that is completely English. Those aren't our words. The word Hawaiian is a descriptor of us. Our descriptor of self is multiple, but we often call ourselves Kanaka Maoli, which means the people of origin. And culture is, like, to me, the word freedom is highly resonant and very poorly defined. And you can run a lot of BS through freedom like you can through culture. And if there was one thing I was taught by my mentors and elders, that we have to be specific. So we began to think about, well, if they're forcing us to use their language, what words do we want to choose in English to accurately capture what our ancestors did? And kind of being like one of 5 punk rockers in high school, I have like punk kid energy. I was like, oh, F you guys. When we call this ancestral sciences and technologies of integrated biosystems management, because that's what we're doing. And we watch you cut the funding all the time for culture. You never cut your STEM funding. But it also begins to understand our ancestors just didn't wake up every day surprised to be alive. They had a deep science that was taught to them, and they had a way of observing the universe and then taking the observations, categorizing, and creating a practice of checking in on them. So that is your science base. And then technologies, they took these sciences and created hyper sophisticated means of living within. Our ancestors of Hawaii were not only self-sufficient islands, they're self-sufficient in their own watersheds called Ahupua'a. They took these things and developed technologies like our fish ponds, our agrarian low ecolo systems, but also our ability to navigate across the open ocean and all of these different means. So that was the first thing we felt was we restate our value. And some of the basis that we bring off, and this is a very quick scan through it. For us, we practice a non-monetary economy. So our economy was our ecology. That we understood the people of the land weren't serfs for us. The people of the land were the stockbrokers. They were the ecologists, the economists. And society was set up under this premise. We didn't have a GDP, and we focused on the metrics of the state, focused on how fit the people were, how abundant the landscape was, and how clearly the water flowed from the headwaters in the mountains to the estuary and the ocean. So that was the starting premise of this idea at the macro level. And at the micro level, all of this was enacted within a family unit. In pre-contact society, everyone lived in our valley very deeply. They traveled, but they kind of stayed there. That was their pico, their center. And using this rubric, therefore, our families were both the unit of education, of employment, and of spiritual center. And moreover, the landscape itself was a family member. We practice a biocentric science, not an anthropocentric science. In our worldview, land wasn't there for our dominion. In our worldview, we are the youngest siblings on a sentient landscape. And everything around us was older than us. And in a Polynesian family system, on how there's others, the youngest have one role, it's STFU, and to pay attention to what the elders are telling us. The elders have the very vital role, though, to care for and nurture the youngest, and they come up in defense of them. So that was the general premise. Therefore, we see the poverty in our community as recent and learned behavior, not coming from our community. The poverty in our community came from the severance of these practices. And therefore, we have to make the case that you're not going to fix the poverty and you're not going to fix the ecological degradation in silos. Moreover, you're not going to teach us sustainability. Our goal is to position the intervention as the restoration of our practices. So that is the first phase of our work. The second was to think about from decolonization to indigenization. And quite often we would talk about like, well, how do you do that? How do you go from one space to the other? And we developed a framework based on the notion of PICO. The way I've described indigenization is to reposition the structures that were thrust upon you to be vehicles for your ancestral responsibilities. And how we did that was what we call the triple PICO analysis. And a PICO is a term is used to mean a center in our language, but also as a connective point. And there's a beloved elder that I knew, Uncle Kekuni Blaisdell. He was a doctor. He's one of the first Hawaiian doctors that created a lot of contemporary power in society, and he was fundamental in the Hawaiian Renaissance of bringing our thinking back. And he described the three picos as three connection points. Like you had your first connection point was your fontanelle, your pico connected you to your ancestors, to the dream, to pull to those that have passed. Your second pico is your navel, that connected you through the navel to the world of the living, those that you're sharing life with now. And your third pico, which is probably the most sacred. All of them are sacred, but really important to our people was your reproductive organs, because that connected you to future generations. So all decisions are made along this transect of understanding where you were, understanding where you came from, where you are now, where you're going. And that's the transect of people that navigate open oceans. You always have to think along those lines. So the first step of it is we call the triple pico analysis of indigenization, was to understand what ancestral practices you're actually bringing forward into a contemporary space. Be able to do a literature review, be able to have calluses on your fingers around it, but also understand when you're doing that practice, who are your mentors? In our worldview, everything has a genealogy, and you could never take this knowledge without understanding, sharing which genealogy you learned it from. This wasn't accessible to everybody. You had to study, and you had to be under a lineage to be able to talk about it. But then you also had to understand, like, well, by doing these practices in contemporary times, how is it not just a museum piece? Like, what is the big aha moment that you have about its application to contemporary society. The second then is using that ancestral practices brought into contemporary space to restore executive decision-making to your community. No longer the performance of indigeneity or sitting on advisory boards, like we sign the policy pieces that impact our community. So you're thinking clearly of how you use ancestral practice to restore agency. And then the third part of it is then how is the restoration of agency for this generation, providing a platform for future generations' unalienable right to abundance, because our ancestors solved for abundance within the carrying capacity of the landscape. And what are the structures and changes you're making so that future generations come in, they have access? The third step for us was to then re-enter into contemporary society, like how we use these models in our grants and business plans. I'll give two real quick examples from when I was working at Ma'o. That conversation we had about, well, how is Grenkiel in Chard? Indigenous, it was this understanding that in pre-contact society, the rites of, we had an annual ceremony where the chief would come and people would show how much food they've produced and how fit and healthy they were. It's called the Makahiki ceremony. And contemporary times, because we're divorced from it, it was like, oh, those are just like quaint practices. Actually, when you understand, we thought about it, that was your year in reporting to your chief. You can show your projected actuals and variance, and you got your contract renewed. Like, we are this fit. You can't cook the books on core strength, and you can't cook the books on a crop that takes a year to 9 months to a year to grow. And they could look at it and say, this is what we said we would do. This is what we actually did. And what is the variance? How do we get there? So the relationship of those that held power to the people for producing was very much accountable. And it was a very deep dynamic. So we took those two metrics of fitness of people and abundance of landscape and moved them into sales and GPAs. As a nonprofit, the two things we tracked on a daily basis, because was the sales of product on our farm and the GPAs of our students. But we grew our food organically because the emphasis isn't on the crop, it's on the soil. So it's the closest correlative to our ancestor growing methodologies. And the entire time we're empowering young adults from our community to not just go to college, but learn how to run the operations. So those aren't perfect correlatives, but they're a way of getting us closer to our ancestral metrics. The other thing we would do is to identify how we recruited students. We identified all the fractures we saw in our community of students not knowing where to go, funders, policymakers wanting to invest in change but not having the right methodology, colleges and high schools trying to either recruit students to college or graduate them from high schools, and social enterprise, business looking for labor. They're all trying to fix these processes in silos. We adopted the principle of the waterway that went from the headwaters and fed every farm in the valley and became enriched by it. So as it grew, our complex carbs exit into the ocean with the lean protein to create the nutrients for the lean proteins of our fish. We called that waterway OI, and we convened our work along that pathway. So in replacing the water with the student, we identified who are all the people that will be part of a student's pathway that will go from high school to college to employment back in their community. And we created a value proposition for each of them. High schools will help you graduate kids. Are you trying to do it? I dropped out of high school that they're going to. I know what's happening. We can guarantee that we're going to get them to college. College, we can help you recruiting. We can help with all the things you need. And then business, we can help place a student in a student in a place, but they're not going to be your wage slave. They're going to be trained to be managers. And we're going to position them in that space. So we use that framework in a similar way. And then finally, like, the important part is to reestablish our agency, and I'm coming on time. So maybe I'll talk about my work after this in the Office of Research, choose some of the questions. But to me, this is the most important part. We have to hit their metrics using our model. Not to affirm their metrics, but to shift the mental model of them, how they understand us. So some of the data points we shared was, I left in 2020, and this is old data, but as of 2016, this is old slide, I guess, the old presentation. We had 108 associate degrees, 25 baccalaureates, and 3 masters come out of. And if you understand the power of education in underserved Indigenous communities, each one of them is an incredible multiplier. And we're showing like how they're understanding the systems that are thrust upon them in their own strengths, on their own terms. and choosing how to participate, but also accessing, being able to access jobs that pay them a living wage. And also more importantly, access, like by having a degree, they have voice and they can speak to the systems directly and deconstruct the systems in real time so that people can understand what is needed. Another thing we saw was and this kind of sets up what my office does now. We had this project called the Mauliola study where we had a biomedical researcher, an indigenous biomedical researcher, study the gut microbiome of our students and found that they're 50 to 60% less likely to develop type 2 diabetes. And that was the first time that we saw research, biomedical research, that was neither trying to tell indigenous people why they were sick or telling indigenous people that they're sick or try to come into a community and provide us the intervention that they created to feed the publishing machine, the publish and perish machine of R1 University. It was instead, we're studying a community intervention and we're using the power of research to provide them what was once anecdotal is now peer-reviewed. It allowed the university to have access to novel funding and novel research, but the community co-owned and co-produced the research. We had equity, like a business equity. And we used this similar research to fundraise, to advocate for our work, but more importantly, to teach our students about this. And many of our students became so enamored with this, learning about how what they were doing was fundamentally rechanging their genetics to be back like how their ancestors were, that they followed a career in medicine. So I will pause there. I have some things I'll share that we moved to the Office of Indigenous Knowledge, which is basically taking all of this work and translating it to the state of Hawaii to show what is our communities, our ancestral practices, our sciences and technologies of innovation of thousands of years of R&D. Our communities, our practices, our ecosystems of innovation. And we need to invest directly in them to help them scale their practices. So in the short term, we can figure out how we can influence and inform current economic models, but in the longer way, it's an invitation in to dream about what can come next. So I'm going to stop there because I hit 17 minutes and step down and open the space. Mahalo.
Thank you so much. Just, I know we're gonna move to PennElys here just one moment, but there was a specific question. If you could just repeat the core metrics again, just I think if you
The
can
core
do that real quick and then
of our
that'd be super.
ancestral system, and this is my interpretation. I was raised in traditional practices. I dropped out of high school, so I have a good understanding of poverty and a good understanding of like public education. But then I went to college and have a bachelor's in Hawaiian studies, trained at Lili Kala, Kamuela Hiva, and Hanoni Trask, and some of those. And I have a master's in urban and regional planning. So a lot of the work and trained under Antipoa Burgess and Bob Agris. So a lot of these ideas were things we're thinking about while we're working on the farm. So the two metrics we felt of pre-contact society when they had this ceremony was the chief would come and the people would produce massive amounts of food to show how much food they could produce. And they concurrently would have games of fitness and intellectual prowess. And those were the core metrics of the state. It wasn't a GDP. It's like, oh, the people are super fit. The landscape is super abundant and the water is flowing. If the people didn't like the chief, they got him killed. They're like, you're not creating a context for abundance. You're not doing your job. We have to be fit for you to lead. You couldn't lead over poverty. And there are stories like ruling chiefs that kind of drive that point home. And the contemporary correlatives that we found to match them, which is imperfect, but communities have to be imperfect as we start our journey, was sales of product and GPAs of students. Because we could, by having sales of products be a metric, we took land that was currently being used for dumps or being used for military training or housing to be like, no, this is the highest best use of land. We're going to change back to, we want our land to be food production, but food production that favors the soils, treats the soil as an endowment for future generations. And then our kids, myself, we're all like highly subject to predatory forces of underemployment, of like being drafted, of like the illegal economies of methamphetamine and all these other things that's moved towards that. No, we are tracking like a college degree is not as a pathway out of your community, but a pathway into agency and pathway into leadership where you can also get compensated and get paid what you're worth and own the businesses. So those are like our two metrics.
Right on. Well, thank you. And, want to really encourage everybody too, as we're, you know, listening to the two presenters. If you have questions, like we can start stacking some of those questions in the chat, and we can look at that and when we get to our trialogue point here. So yeah, thank you so much, Kamu. And PennElys, I'd love to invite you up to share some of the things that you're working on and thinking about, with this topic and within this field.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much. I love I love listening to you. I feel like um oh our frameworks, our cosmologies, our ways that we interacted with our histories and our communities, and the work that we've done is so parallel. So parallel. I resonate with everything, with so much of what you're saying, and where you're the work that you're doing. Just just a different specific lens, but so similar. It's just so cool to learn. So Ani Minogija got everybody. I again PennElys Droz, Anishinaabe and Northern European descendant. Just a little bit of context, a little, thank you, Kamu, for the genealogy, opening up with that genealogy. My mom is Anishinaabe from Michigan, and Wyandotte from Ohio, actually. And my dad is Northern European. He was a professor at Humboldt State University. And my mother moved out with him, and she said she would move out with him, but she wanted to raise us in a Native community. So my family and I, we were raised very integrated into the Yurok community, and all of our Northern California Native communities that I have a lot of love, and nephews and relatives there up in Humboldt, Northern California. So and I live here on Jonathon territory, Tucson, Arizona, most of the year. But we go back to Winning, Madeline Island in Wisconsin in the summer, and we are going to be farming there. My family just took over a friend's farm, and so that's a really exciting journey for us. So a little bit of how I got here. My background, when I was very young, I was, angry and wanted to flip the tables of colonial society. So, join Native Youth Movement, join direct action work to do environmental protection, cultural protection, got involved in Indigenous human rights work, and worked for Indigenous Environmental Network, international Indigenous environmental justice organization, and then really landed in kind of what Kamu was saying, is if we are going to be asking our nations, if we're going to be rebuilding our powerful nations, and if we're going to be asking our nations to say no to pipelines, if we're going to be asking our nations to say no to clear cuts and dams, and then we need to provide the creative alternatives. And so we created an organization called, I ended up graduating out of Humboldt in engineering. So my academic background's engineering and environmental science. And we started an organization called Sustainable Nations to do what we would call now regenerative development, very practical. Initially, it was very grassroots, hands-on, renewable energy, natural building, ecological wastewater treatment. And we did food sovereignty work and development back then as well, before the big, Indigenous food sovereignty movement just blossomed. And then we sort of stepped back on that one. And by the time we closed up shop at Sustainable Nations, we were doing a lot of spiritually based, I call it, spiritually and culturally based master planning, infrastructure development for nations, for our Indigenous nations, and ended up sort of accidentally going all the way through school. I did it was kind of a fun thing. So I am a balanced, the thing that got me into science, I have a science background. The thing that got me really into science is when I was 14 years old, I took a physics class, and I did a little bit of reading about cosmology, physics, and quantum physics, and it blew my mind that it aligned with our tribe's creation story and our ways of seeing the world. It floored me. And so I, passionately pursued physics because of those alignments. And then be able, I continued on in my scientific training, just being fascinated by the intimate alignments between the best scientists and our traditions and cultures. It makes sense. Good scientists study creation, intimate observation, and study creation. And so do we. So did our ancestors. And so can we again, if we've forgotten it. And so when I went back into school to do my doctorate, I dove into resilience science and in engineering and resilience science. And and found even more, as time goes on, these scientific fields just line up more and more deeply and intimately with our teachings, our values, our traditions, our practical, this is how to live a good life. So that was what I ended up in. And if anybody wants fun articles about any of these things, I'd be happy to share them with you as we go on. And also inherently doing engineering work, doing community development work in our communities dove headfirst into economies and economic planning. So I'm going to share my screen and move through a little bit of sharing here. Oops. How do we do this again? There we go. Indigenous economies. How does it work? There it goes. So again, a little colonial history. When I was fascinated by colonial history. Where did colonial cultures even come from? When I was involved in international work, just meeting people from nation after nation after nation who don't come from colonial cultures across the globe. I was like, man, I really feel like the majority of the world's cultures are non-colonial. It just happens to be that these colonial cultures did a pretty good number. But the practice of colonialism removes people. It's a process of disconnection, right? So removing people from relationship to land. And you can think about this in Turtle Island. You can also think about this in Europe. You can think about this in Africa. This colonial history applies to all global landscapes, depending on how far back in time you are thinking. So people were removed from the land. People are removed from connected community. People are attempted to be removed from their land-based values. And their colonial tool is the strategic degradation or attempted destruction of traditional economies and enforced economic dependency. So that's a really big thing to understand when you are navigating global communities right now. Economic dependency was desired and enforced. Okay, so a lot of this is what a lot of us are recovering from now, is this enforced economic dependency. And so a lot of people will talk about this. There's physical colonization, there's emotional, spiritual, psychological colonization, and there's economic colonization. So that's where we've been. So what's an economy anyway? All an economy is, I always say this because when I was young and I would hear economics or economy, it felt very foreign. It felt very, like the guys in suits that you see on the news. Well, what's an economy anyway? Economy is just the way a people provide for themselves, both the act of gathering resources and the social agreements about how these resources are distributed. That's all an economy is. And economies are governed by values. So I always think about the different economic systems that people talk about, capitalism and communism and socialism, and it's really the health of any of these forms of economy are just tied to the values that govern them. That's it. You can have, and we've all seen the examples of, we've all seen the examples of that people will bring up about, communism and socialism and, how some of these have been so harmful. Well, it's the values they're governed by. It's the values that quote unquote capitalism is governed by that creates the problem here. So, we talk a lot about when, working in community, working for nations. The first thing that we do is we connect to values. Again, right now, and I do want to preface this real quick because I'm gonna don't have a lot of time here. I want to speak to the fact that every single Indigenous community has, different culture, different frameworks, different relationships. Even within our communities, because of colonial forces, we also have, we have Catholics, we have Christians, we have traditional folks, we have, I was raised as an unprogrammed Quaker, so traditional but Quaker, and we just have a lot of diversity within our peoples. But what I've noticed when we find a location of finding common ground is our values. What are the values that make you who you are as a people? And when we can articulate those, that's the root of beautiful, spiritually responsible infrastructure development. Those common values are the root of spiritually responsible economic development. And so we always start with values. A little bit of a share about what is Indigenous values? If we're so diverse, what does Indigenous values even mean? So I frame this a little bit carefully. Our stories often teach. So I'm not saying everybody, I'm not saying all, but I've had the honor to meet and connect intimately with a lot of folks at this point in my life. And I feel pretty good about sharing this with our groups here. Our stories often teach that everything's alive. Everything is a living expression of the Creator, the Spirit. Our purpose is to learn to live in a good, harmonious way in our relationships with creation. Our relationships can't be removed from responsibility. Big Indigenous value right there. If you are in relationship with the world, you are in relationship with your family, your relationship with yourself, and all relationships require responsibility. And these responsibilities extend forward and back through time. There's a sense of you are part of a flow of time. Land is everything. So when I say land, I also mean elements, spirits, histories, stories, the source of knowledge. And land is coded with knowledge through time. Everything that happens in that land remains in the land. Land is coded with knowledge through time. And to live a good life, mirror creation. That's my term. I'm like mirror creation of that's my summation of a lot of teachings of different elders and relatives. Mirror creation. The mentor that taught me how to bead, for example, I used to separate out all my beads into different colors to make it easier. And she told me, and so if you do that, no judgment. Everybody has their own path, but she said, mix those beads up. That's not life. Like life is chaos. Life is a whole big mixed bag. And so the teaching in that beadwork is that you pick out the color, you go into the chaos and you pick out what you want to create the beauty that you're making. So mirror creation, in all ways. The place of humans. Humans are not everything. A lot of our stories have to do with times we've messed up. A lot of our stories have to do with we are the little brothers and sisters. We are the most dependent. We have responsibility for gratitude and care. because we are dependent on everybody else to take care of us. The plants, the animals, everybody else needs to take care of us in order to allow us to thrive and be strong. But we are powerful. We are powerful. But that's another story. I could tell like 6 stories with each one of the 6 specific stories with each one of these slides or more. And also reciprocity, you know, because we are so dependent, we have to give back. We absolutely have to give back to each other, to the sources of life, have to give back. And if we don't, bad things are going to happen. A lot of our stories, if we don't, when we forgot, I think that's a special thing about in communities today that still are connected to their indigeneity is we remember how we messed up in the past. and there's lessons about how to not do that again. So what do we need to do? We need to care for and keep the land in a continuous state of regeneration through mirroring the processes, patterns, flows of creation, respecting all of the beings' right to exist. I always say that, and then I also say, you know, in recognition of the cycles of life, we have to kill to eat. You can honor beings' right to exist. At the same time, you have to take life to survive. It can be done in a good way. We got to always ask ourselves, are we being a good relative? Are we being a good relative to ourselves? Are we being a good relative to our families, our communities? How are we being a good relative? Being a good relative requires clarity. Being a good relative requires boundaries. So antagonistic and excessively interfering relations with creation, and when I say creation, I mean all of us, lead to hardship. Boundaries and responsibilities are important for good relationships. Greed and mistreatment of others leads to downfall. Always, always. Chaos, I put this image, this is a Rabbit Strickland, an Anishinaabe painter who's of Nanabosho, who's our, like in California, where I was raised, it was like coyote, you know, there's the coyote that comes and mixes things up and like messes things up, but is a teacher. We haven't, you know, a lot of our cultures have, you know, that introducer of chaos or weirdness, or just the one who mixes it up. But that's power and very important. You have to mix it up. You have to be responsive to change. You have to value feedback and interact with it. Listen to children. They are the newness. Their visions are the newness. So we need to cultivate the creative observational capacity of youth. There's nothing more important than helping your youth be out on the land, harvesting, hunting, planting, engaging, creating life. And then also, you know, those coming of age ceremonies where they go out and they fast for 4 days by themselves and learn how to relearn, because all little children know how to listen, but they relearn how to listen in their adult lives. They relearn how to learn from creation. Nothing is more important than retaining that in our youth, because then we can look to them for their new wisdom when we know that they're really connected to that earth. And then also listen to elders' understandings that are built through time and depth. It's that balance, right? And above all, listen to the land. Us humans can get a little wild sometimes. Generosity and reciprocity. How do we always ask, how do we give back? Every single day, how do we give back? How can we give back better? How can we shift what we do to give back in a better way? How do you produce and share? How do we trade? How do we interact with our community that cultivates good relationships of abundance? I'm going to skip a few things. Dr. Ron Trosper was my, he's an economist. He's an elder, a Salish Kootenai elder. He was my dissertation committee chair. He was just a brilliant guy. He wrote a book called Indigenous Economies. I recommend it. He you know, he's a very, very, very academic, just FYI, but also very, very rooted. He was like, the principles of an indigenous economy are that they have a permanence and a responsibility within a homeland. It's and the understanding that it's a collective responsibility with all those agreements on governance and care. They have a deep emphasis on reciprocity and generosity with the land and each other. And there's a system of accountability for leadership. I love, and I mentioned this to Jonathon briefly, I'm going to wrap it up now, but the recommendations of resilient science, which it does involve biomimicry, although you can mirror creation, you can practice biomimicry with zero spiritual wisdom. So keep your heart open and on that one, just be aware. But the recommendations of resilient science on what creates a resilient social ecological system. And I love the fact that a branch of science now, they have realized that people and the land are not separate and they can't be talked about separately. And so they created a term called social ecological science, social ecological resilience, understanding that the same things that make our lands healthy are the same principles that make us healthy. If anyone wants to chat about those things, I'd love to at some point in the future. You can email me. So based on these values and the intimate alignment, if I had another hour, I would love to dive into how each of these values I stated have a direct scientific mirror in resilient science. What makes a powerful, healthy, thriving, resilient community, economy, ecology? Each one of these values has a direct mirror in those principles. And so given what we know here, how I think we have a lot of power together to build collective futures. So the colonial forces, the colonial cultures, the colonial values that all of us have been beholden to, or are a product of, or hold in our ancestry, or to some degree. They removed people from land. They removed people from connection with each other, and so I feel like decolonization, the active practice of decolonizing, is that reconnection, the reconnection with the land in responsibility and care and relationship, the reconnection with our communities, families, and nations in responsibility, care, good relations. There's a lot of teachings about how to do that in a good way, and it's easier said than done. But I'm empowered by knowing that a lot of us are working on this across the cultures and across the communities. So these are some thoughts about, how do we build these collective decolonized futures together? I think it's very important to recognize that Indigenous people and their homelands are inseparable, and that our understandings offer strong critical teachings that often resonate with the souls of a lot of people, regardless of whether your family remembers their Indigenous roots or not. Reconnection is critical. That's where to begin. Everybody can begin with that. Reconnection to the earth, reconnection with ancestors, reconnection with your healing lineages. Healing your lineages, regardless of what they are. Justice is important. If you have a deep imbalance in one direction, you got to balance it out. You can't just pretend it didn't happen. You got to balance it out, or the energy of this world is not going to be balanced. So restoring Indigenous care and governance. Reparations for colonial harm for all of our relatives. Just balance the energy. Restoration. We have to, from recognition, reconnection, and justice, we can restore this balance to our communities. We have a long way to go. And the work is hard and emotional and intimate and painful and beautiful. But I feel like I feel a lot of power and I feel a lot of potential. I am the mother of 5. My older 3 children are all adults now. And their generation is incredible. Their generation is incredible. So are we. But their generation's incredible, and I'm watching their power as we move forward, and I'm grateful that they're up and coming. So that's check. Thanks.
Thank you, PennElys. wow, there's just so much in there. I was wanting to know, is that socio or social ecological science?
Yeah. Social ecological resilience is
Okay, reason.
a branch of science now. Who'd have thunk?
Wow, right on. Like maybe catching up to what was already known, right?
Yeah.
So in the chat, there's a reminder, just for everybody for the panel. This is being recorded. You're going to be remain on mute. Please use the chat in order to ask questions because we are going to get into a little bit of a dialogue here for this last half hour. And you could use, we love actually all the little emojis and reaction buttons and everything too. So feel free to fire away with those. Really thank everybody for being here today for this conversation. With the one of the things that we wanted to do, and I'm really curious to just that have this conversation with both PennElys and Kamu, and ask everybody out in the outer realms, I guess. Well, a question that would be, what are some of the things as you all both listen to the other's presentation? Like, what are some particular elements that really stood out to you? Like, what's something that's sticking with you from these presentations that we've heard from each other that you're like, oh, that's lodging right now in my mind. You just would love to, you know, I'll start just so I can say, I think a couple of the different pieces from both presentations. One, starting off with creating our own alternatives. I think the other part that is really resonating with me right now too is the idea of the trying to remember how you worded it, Kamu, but the idea of the land, that this is its highest uh, function, or that we're going to take this land and turn it in. So I'm trying to remember the term
Highest
that you
and
used
best
to
use.
describe that.
The highest, it was like part of like we would see in many indigenous communities, also communities of color, also like communities of like the people of European ancestry that are living in poverty and have held space in their community for a long time are all subjects to prayer as highest and best use of land, right? And what are the means and mechanisms where we reclaim that? Um, Using the language of the system back at them. So to repurpose like land in our community, which was where all the dumps were, where all of like the military bases were, and then giving our own druthers where some of the meth labs were, like from the people living like it's like it goes across the board that we're gonna grow food again like our ancestors did. And we're going to have that the productivity of our farm when we take it to market justify our existence in your world. But to us, it's in alignment with our ancestral prerogative that we have to grow food with emphasis not on crop, with emphasis on land and people being healthy. So that was this idea of the highest and best use. This is a term we used like 12, 15 years ago when we were just really scrappy, but it may have evolved over time.
Thank you. And maybe while you're unmuted, Kamu, what's something that sticks to
Yeah,
you from this presentation?
sure. I think first and foremost, mahalo PennElys. Just there's a gentleness and a thoughtfulness in the way you express the language that in other spaces could totally be weaponized. I think our smiles belie their age sometimes, but I understand that, like spite is taking poison and wishing someone else to be sick, right? And like, how do we heal ourselves in learning? So that was a very deep dive in that practice. And the thing I'm appreciating in being in relationship with everyone on the call is something that a lot of my mentors, like Hawaii is a really unique context because our people ancestrally were some of the last colonized, and we had a really interesting relationship with the colonizer that we were not forced. Warfare, we lost most of our people to illness and to political means. but our ancestors had a runway of time to kind of develop their own monarchy and develop their own laws. And when they created their own monarchy, they were very inclusive. So a lot of people that were brought to sugar plantation, they became Hawaiian nationals. And many of them, when the overthrow happened, fought with the queen. So the thing I've always learned, and one of my mentors, Dr. Manumeyer, also Kumu Manumeyer, she's a revered teacher, often says, indigeneity doesn't mean brown people. Indigeneity means continuity. And what is it for how do we continue practices, right? So that we can be in relationship with everyone on the call. And I think about the reflection point is, what we talk about in our space, when you're in a space where indigenous people exist, you have to understand that your fate and theirs are intrinsically linked, because the practices they hold are necessary to calibrate us back to a more sane way of being. And the best thing you can do is support them in the restoration of their practices, but not in a way that you debase yourself. You have to understand your privilege and intersectionality, and like, you can go home, they can't. This is their home. Show up that way, but also hopefully it can invoke a deep love of your indigeneity and questions about, like, who are the people that make up your genetic structure? Where are the lands that shaped your phenotype? And how you express yourself in the world, and how you develop love to provide license to people to love their places deeply and build that economy around it that doesn't sound fluff when it comes to like hitting the books. Because this isn't fluff work. This is like adjacent to drug dealing, and if this is as gritty and hardcore as that kind of stuff is, when it comes to having to face real things and create real movement. But it's not fostered in hate and not fostered in bitterness, but abundance. So I'm taking that and being with everyone today. Thank you, Jason.
Thank you. And PennElys, what about you? Like, what is something sticking, for you from the conversation that we had so far?
Yet I am I am excited to I'm always excited to hear Kamuela's model. In the fall, we're going to be working. Oh, I didn't even say, shoot. So now my job, I work for Indian Collective. So I work for Indian Collective, indiancollective.org. I worked in the foundation, doing grant making. I still work in the foundation, but our big mission is to get access to hoarded wealth and rematriate hoarded wealth. So wealth has been hoarded. Wealth has been extracted from the land and people. And so our job is to go get it back and put it back in the land and people in a liberated way. It's pretty cool that it's pretty cool and telling that there are a lot of folks that sit on hoarded wealth these days, who, when you say, we will accept your money if you are willing to give up your power and fight white supremacy, which is Indian Collective's language with our funders, that, we'll take your funding, but you have to give up your power and fight white supremacy and have a plan to do so. Have a plan you're accountable to do so. So it's put your money where your mouth is kind of work. And there's quite a lot of folks out there that, I think it's a human thing when you're functioning in a unhealthy system. It's a very human thing to want to rebalance. So that's pretty cool. Now I do a lot of the regenerative development work and, technical assistance with tribes and some of that stuff, and also work on healing money trauma. All of us have some money trauma, no matter where you're from. We all have some money trauma. And so, I work on healing money trauma and leadership stuff with our communities, and also create curriculum. So I'm really excited because we're working on an economy and community development for power building curriculum. And would love to connect and learn
Yeah.
In regards to I think, you know, you can talk a lot about the overarching, and I do think it's important, obviously, because a lot of the talks that I do, I'm giving this framing.
Right.
You know, I'm the type of person that I personally really need framing to feel like I understand what I'm doing. And so a lot of the times when I talk, I give framing first. But without practical application, without examples of practical application, who is doing this? How are they doing this? What does it look like in your community? Oh, this is what it could look like in my community. Without that, tides don't turn. And so, and you know, the world is made up of so many people. Even thinking of the just the people that all sort of are on this call or feel similarly about some of the transformations that need to happen, we all have a different lens. And so the sharing of the different lenses is really powerful. And so I definitely want to learn more from you.
I would like to, there's a question that came up that I really like, and by Tyler, about the balancing of like how do you invite people in, right? And that is like the fundamental question. Yeah, and I really appreciate you for asking. That's the accountability questions. And what I think is important for us is my goal and so much work we do is like how do you create a practice? A practice is an ad hoc set of things you do. A practice comes from a principle that you put into action and then you learn for over time. So I think to answer the question, like how do we balance meet people where they are, we have to develop our core practice first and invite them in. In pre-contact society, and no one, you couldn't just join anything. Like you had to be able to. There was a way to vet and enter and processes and rituals. Um, and I think for us, we reflected that in the structure of how so much programs that we've designed, whether it's a model like organic farm, as I mentioned, or some of the current work we're doing in our office is we're creating what we call indigenous data hubs, where we at University of Hawaii there's the laboratory for advanced media visualization, and then if you go to our campus at University of Hawaii West Oahu, we have Academy of Creative Media. But we have a native Hawaiian graduate student named Kari Noi, and she's kind of like gone and studied the Team Labs model in Japan and brought that back so that we can do deep visualization as well as do 3D printouts of a community organization's lands. And we've been running projects with the National Science Foundation to use that practice of data visualization with regional students from their community who are in partnering with community organizations that are doing restorative work, to invite them to create this process by we pair them with students who are working on their lands, learning deeply with them about the practices, students from that community, and with their consent, and then translating what they're learning into data visualization points and mapping it out. And then through that model, how we've built this practice, we're focused on the narrative at the beginning. Is our job is to reunite youth with their landscapes through the current array of practitioners who are working on those landscapes, to surface these ancestral systems, to be brought into contemporary times, to have these young adults know that their self-actualization is tied to the actualization of land through their ancestral practices. Because we can codify this within the university, we're giving them degrees, but we can also function in the space of my office to position the community organizations as innovation ecosystems innovation and provide them direct operational support, not programmatic funding. We fund their programs like indefinitely, and therefore we create this practice of continuing to use these contemporary technologies and this structure of a university to invest in operating funding of community organizations who have their own practices of entry and accountability to house their students and get the students to be back in land, which then creates the metrics of ecological restoration and academic achievement, as well as economic development. And all of those things are intersecting circles of people that have their own practices that consent to work together that are hitting metrics that NSF and R1 University and are really loving because they're creating more students in STEM. We're doing all the contemporary metrics, but as I shared earlier, we're deeply tied to our ancestral accountabilities of how do we adapt in our times and technologies we have to the perpetual relationship with the next generation and their landscape and the practices that they bring with them, but expressing them in a way that they have tools to meet the future on their terms, to renegotiate any contract that they want, because they will be set up as the consultants. So that's kind of the way that we're thinking about addressing that invitation in and meeting people where they are with their own practice.
So I want to, I'm just thinking about a couple of the different points that are being brought up to, whether that's the way that we are even thinking about money, the way that we're thinking about meeting people, whether that's around money, whether that's around land, whether that's around spaces of knowledge, all of those different places of intersection. One of the things, I was thinking about when, PennElys, you mentioned earlier, creating alternatives as Luis Macas, one of the leaders from Ecuador, when they were really pushing back against all the different environmental damage that was taking place for the native communities there. He told the story about they were able to finally hold space with the president. They basically shut down the country of Ecuador. And he said that the president said, "Okay, I know what you oppose, but what do you propose?" And so Luis Marcus shared that with us as like this was a thing that they were fully prepared to answer, he realized at that moment. And what I'm hearing also here, and it relates to a question that comes on, gosh, and it's like I think straight up the way that these conversations are so big that we have like 8 minutes left on this clock, for us to do this. So I guess this will be a power round. But there was a question here that was asking about the way that we bring these, I guess again, very clearly, like how do we bring these things out of just being an indigenous thing, right? Like how are we bringing these things forward to mainstream them? And I think the way that we talked about this earlier, to really force, welcome, invite the cracks that are right now present within the colonial presence, the hegemonic presence that has done so much harm. What are the ways that we can take this so that we're springing forward new life to expand those cracks, to be able to offer a new world beyond just native communities? And I just want to like throw that out with such a little window of time to answer that. But like, what are some thoughts specifically about that way that we take this mainstream?
I want to give PennElys the last word. I'll just say that this is it now. This is what it looks like. There is no ever clear cut thing. And I also say, like, my goal is not to romanticize indigenous people, right? Like, colonial forces are kind of something that showed up in free contact society. Like the Hawaiian I speak is the Hawaiian that comes to the Southern Island chains, and like if we do that, then we don't create the critical analysis internally within our own community of how we wield power and how we create space. So I think that this is what the process looks like. It is dialectic, it's a conversation, and it's rooted in like awareness of each other's practices. And I saw this quote in this article that years back that I think about a lot. Two quotes that are from non-Indigenous people that I really love. One is from Paul Hawken. I stole his book when I was in college many years ago, Natural Capitalism, and then I had a chance to talk with him at Swarthmore. I told him I stole his book, but he has this title called Blessed Unrest, which I've always thought about my work. And the other, I think, is the notion I saw, this fostering, to me, indigeneity, I love, is described by this term I love called rugged interdependence. That we with each other, that we don't, and that people come differently, but if you come to the space with the right intention, over time, you're going to be buried in that land. and then you will be part of the soil. And that you have that obligation that the indigenous people have had to make sure that the next generation and the soil are thriving in contemporary contexts, in the economic model and education systems. And that has space for everybody, because indigenous people by no means can solve this alone at all. It needs to be, you need to have dialogues of what intersectional collectivity looks like, and create space to fail and make mistakes, and to be okay with that, and to continue to commit. That's my general sense.
Yep. Yep. Absolutely. Yeah. Oh my goodness. A lot of the times, and I said a little bit of this kind of thing in the chat as well. I feel like, I was raised in Trinidad when it was still felt rural, and back in the 80s. And the thing about being in a small community is that you can actively not like somebody, but you're gonna feed their kids.
Yeah.
You're gonna go help them change their tire. Like you're gonna, you show up for each other because your futures are tied together.
Fully.
So I believe in that really powerfully. My role in this world has as a bridge person who's interethnic, who was raised indigenous, but is definitely interethnic. Part of my healing, my lineages, has been to recognize that I need to heal my colonial lineages.
Yep.
And part of and I need to heal my European lineages from the violence that tore them away from their land. And away from their communities. And a lot of what I say is like, we can talk about, we can share science. We can share science, we can do what, share models. Fundamentally, hearts need to change. So I always, I always talk about think creatively with your people about how to create practical models of the alternatives, and just do it, like at whatever scale, at whatever piddly little scale. Reach hands to your neighbors and bring them food and be connected while having boundaries. But the core thing I think about is, for me, the thing that has given me any kind of wisdom at all in my life has been, my mother raised me to recognize the living earth, and kicked me out into the world to make sure that I connected with a living earth. So when I felt hopeless, and when my own cultural communities, when my Native community has been struggling, when any struggles that come to me, I can go to the earth and I can gather my power and wisdom back to move ahead. And all of us, in my cosmology, we're all children of earth. And so it's been so heartbreaking over the years to realize how many people were not raised in living relationship with the earth, with the land, and want that. One of my son's friends was like, well, how do I begin to, I want to feel that too. And I was like, go, because I do think that I think that that's what we need to do. We need to go and introduce ourselves. We need to go out and say hello. Like, go out into the world. If you're in a city, go out into a park, go into anywhere where you can get away from the human manipulated creation, and you can find the creation and introduce yourself and your intention. Say hi. You might feel really cheesy or ridiculous, but just say hello and introduce yourself. If you don't know whose ancestors are there, also introduce yourself to the ancestors. Say who you are and what you're there for. Give them your intention. And I feel like if people, and I know that I'm getting into like our cosmologies pretty tightly, but I have seen that kind of thing, like the earth will start reaching out back to you. You'll find your way. And then when you have that power, then you can move that in, and it's gonna, and pull it into all of the rippling pond circles of your impact.
Yeah.
So yeah, I definitely believe in the power of heart transformation.
Mhm. Well, thank you. Thank you, everyone. There's like so many other questions, and we could probably be sitting here all day and having such some awesome conversation. I think going back to that whole dispatch from the Zapatistas, I want to just close with this and then ask Kamu if you just help send this all out.
Yeah.
There's another line after you have Defensa Zapatista having this conversation, ask you these questions. You have this other figure, old Antonio, and my understanding of old Antonio is he represents the old indigenous folks who were there in the beginning of the Zapatista uprising, and he offers this line that he says, like, when the men and women of Maize look at the world and its pain, they also see the world that must be created, and they make a path to get there. They have three gazes, one that came for what came before, one for the present, and for the one that is yet to come. That is how they know what they are planting is a treasure, the gaze itself. So in that, the way that we look back, the way that we see today, the way that we're looking forward is the treasure in itself too. So really appreciate the knowledge, the reflection, the inspiration. And I know this is a path that we're walking and creating together,
Yep.
and invite all of you to continue, keep walking, keep creating, keep making. And with that, Kamu, can you
Yeah.
help close us out and send us out?
Totally. Yeah. Yeah. When our ancestors had long rituals for deep work, and then very short rituals for when we was in labor. And I'll do that. So one of my mentors always told me that, you don't, it's very interesting. Like the sister thinking is it kind of had a correlative in the Sermon on the Mount, which I found beautiful. Cross sections of our faiths all speak to the same thing. And if you're gonna pray in a closet, you're not doing these rituals for public performance. You're doing it as a form of communion. Because PennElys open, this is actual ritualized space. She grounded these space and the thinking and the full expression of our collective ancestry. And my mentor told me, like, when you're actually doing a pule or prayer or a thing, you're sending an email to the universe. And once you hit send, you better understand that you hit send, because there's going to be a response. So after we do a pule or prayers and our ritual, we'd always close the Amama Noa, which means we just hit send on this email to the universe. So you're gonna expect a response. So mahalo all, mahalo Jonathon, and for the Decolonize Economics team for allowing me to speak, and mahalo as always, PennElys, to share space with you. And go home, love your lands, love your kids, love your place.
Oh, no.
Oh, no.